Hello and welcome to Today in the News on Vanguard Life. I am Precious Chukudi. We begin with the front pages of the papers this morning. Starting off with Vanguard. Vanguard is leading with Justices Fight Back. The writer says, the main story says, we can't replace law with emotions, and that's coming from the CJN. Says judges won't be afraid of intimidation with independence, calls the third arm highly, adds rule of law in Nigeria questionable since 1999. Discloses NJC ready to receive petitions against election tribunal judges, swears in 58 new sons, tasks them on professionalism, integrity. CJN's Convention of External Influences troubling, and that's come from Articles 8. Society fails when public confidence in judiciary fails, and that's come from Labour Party. CSOs fault CJN, AGF task new sons on professionalism, others. And we can see a photo story showing a France-Nigerian Council meets in Lagos. And on page 9, ASUU CONUA warns the government against new varsities, says existing ones are malnourished. FEC votes 3.23 billion naira for explosives, narcotic detection scanners in 5 airports. Stories above on page 37. Judicial decisions can affect FDI, and that's coming from Central Bank Governor. Federal government jacks up a 2024 budget to 27.5 trillion naira. On page 13, Tinubu reappoints Mele Kyari, Group CEO of NNPC Limited. And on page 13, appeal court judgment, protest rocks a part of CONUA, diversion, NCAA grounds a United Nigeria airline where to lease aircraft. Appeal court sacks a Kaduna speaker, orders a rerun in 5 polling units. Lastly, on front page of Vanguard newspaper, banks ready for recapitalization, and that's coming from CIBN. We take a look at the Nation newspaper. The Nation is leading with Akeredolu Ayedatiwa peace agreement heads for collapse. Writer says deputy governors, the loyalists pushing lawmakers to make him acting governor. I stand on Abuja deal, that speaker insists. Stories above, Shaibu, I'm intimidated. My allocation seized. Deputy governor joins the 2024 race. Supreme Court will get full 21 justices. Ariwola pledges reduces case at Apex Court. We did 90 kilometers of roads in 1 year, says Osun government. Adeleke on holiday in Thailand. Tinubu orders massive fixing of federal roads, reports bad roads via dedicated phone line. And last year on the front page of The Nation, we have Union Bank delisted shares from NGX. We'll take a look at the Guardian newspaper. The Guardian is leading with $1 trillion economy. Federal government proceeds with an unambitious budget, proposes a 27.5 trillion naira next year. We can see an infograph showing more on that report on how the 27.5 trillion budget translates to a per capita spending plan. UBEC bemoans a shortage of teachers, 100 billion naira yearly funds. You can read that on page 9. Despite warning, protest in Kano over Court of Appeal ruling, and CJN seeks amendment for termination of most cases at appeal court. The untreated relic of hashtag NSAS protest 3 years after. That's an editorial on The Guardian. We take a look at the Punch newspaper. The Punch is leading with Tinubu presents a budget Wednesday. FEC is a $1 billion loan. The writer says the federal government targets 18 trillion naira revenue, raises exchange rate benchmark from 700 naira to a dollar to 750 naira to a dollar. Speaker, opposition lawmakers assures Nigerians of proper budget screening to grill ministers. We can see a photo story showing the president swears in 8 Palm Sex presides over FEC meeting. Worker dies, 2 injured at Lagos construction sites. You can see that on pages 4 and 5. And Ondo lawmakers meet today, may declare Ayedatiwa acting governor. You can see that on page 5. Stories above, attack on judges, public sentiment can't displace law, and that's coming from CJN, and you can read that on page 2. I'm best to succeed, Obaseki Shribu declares. And last year on front page of the Punch newspaper, someone gets staff of office December 16, court halts removal, and that's all we can take on the front pages of the papers. Join us after the break. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. If you're just joining us today in the news on Vanguard Live, I am Precious Chukudi. Joining me to talk about some of the stories on the front pages of the papers this morning is Mr. Dayo Akintobi, publisher of Liquidity Today, Keja Today, and Lekki Today. It's good to have you join me this morning, sir.
Always a pleasure to be here. Good morning,
Yeah.
Precious. Good morning to all our viewers.
Yeah. All right, so let's delve in. And of course, there have been controversies as regards various courts handling election disputes, of which the CJA and Justice Ariola has said that public sentiment and emotions cannot replace the law. What's your take? And also, do the people have a right to be worried? Especially because we're coming from a time where people are saying that they do not have confidence in the judiciary anymore.
That's a big problem. If the judiciary loses credibility with the public, then the very foundation of democracy is undermined because basically um, the judiciary is the arm of that democracy that makes sure that justice, fairness, and truth is upheld. And if all of a sudden the public loses confidence in the judiciary on either of two bases, either suspicions of incompetence or suspicions of corruption, either of the two. Whether it's that you don't know what you're doing as a result, there's miscarriages of justice, or whether because you've been influenced, there's also miscarriages of justice. Bottom line is, if people think that justice is not being served, if people think that there's a habitual pattern of miscarriages of justice, either because of incompetence or lack of integrity, then that undermines the entire system completely. Now, to some extent, the Chief Justice is correct that um, delivery of justice should be devoid of emotion, should be devoid of sentiment. It should deal with the facts at hand. That, in all things being equal, under normal circumstances, that is true, is correct. However, when you look at things like election petitions, and he was making those comments in light of the aftermath of recent judicial pronouncements in Kano, Zamfara, Nasarawa, some other places that the public have greeted with skepticism as to whether this was a real justice because the will of the people seems to have been subverted. Any judicial proceeding that subverts the will of the people in a democracy, and by will of the people, I'm talking about elections, I don't think that technicalities of any sort, you filed something late, there was a typographical error somewhere, something was a pre-election matter, you didn't bring it up. I feel like as long as there is integrity in the numbers that say the largest number of people who voted chose so, and so, I don't think any judicial mechanism whatsoever should be able to upturn that because at the end of the day, what is democracy? Is rule of the people, by the people, for the people. So if justices are using technicalities to upturn the will of the people, then we turn democracy on its head. So I do think that to some extent, the will of the people, because when he's saying devoid of sentiment, devoid of emotion, that's essentially saying what the people think doesn't matter to them when they are dispensing justice. But I'm saying in election matters, what the people think is the vote they cast. That is the ultimate power. The power of that ballot supersedes the power of any judge. So I don't think the Supreme Court or any group of judges should be able to upturn the will of the people. So in that instance, the will of the people, the sentiment of the people, the prevailing desire of the people is what should be paramount.
All right. Also, the CJN has called for constitutional amendment to limit the cases that make it to the Supreme Court. What's your take on that? As well as you speaking about the will of the people. There have been arguments on if all the cases that are brought to the court should be dealt with, especially when it comes to election cases, before these individuals are sworn into offices.
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, I do believe that I do agree with the sentiment that all electoral disputes should be resolved before May 29 swearing in date. I think part of the problem is why we're seeing all these off-cycle elections is because judicial processes have continued after the swearing in. Then all of a sudden they find in favor of the person who is challenging. Then they take out the person who's already been sworn in. Start this person's tenure starts from the current date. It makes the whole thing untidy. So I do agree. I think for the sanity of our electoral process, it should be put in place that all electoral disputes should be resolved before swearing in date. So there should be time limits on how long these processes can take. But I know that the Electoral Act has made some amendments. I think there's 180 days for the initial appeal. I think there's another 60 days for the subsequent after the tribunal and things like that. So they are shortening the time, but it's still not short enough. It needs to be reduced to before the swearing in date. Now, having said that, in terms of constitutional amendments about cases going before the Supreme Court, I don't think that every case belongs in the Supreme Court. I believe there should be a vetting process that looks at a case before it goes to the judges. I think there should be a sifting process that looks at it and determines if it has merit to go before the judges. I don't think that, I think the Supreme Court should be able to deny to hear a case. I think if a case is brought before it gets to a panel sitting, there should be an evaluation process of legal minds who will sit down and look and say, is this case worth being put before the Supreme Court? If that panel decides that this case does not have merit to be reconsidered, then they dump it. I don't think everything should go before the Supreme Court because it ties up the court. I mean, right now, on average, apart from electoral matters, it takes about 8 to 9 years for a civil case to be heard by the Supreme Court. 8 to 9 years. It's not because they want to drag their feet, or it's just because the sheer number of cases that are coming before the court just simply make the whole process convoluted and cumbersome. And so in that case, a lot of meritorious cases end up losing their value because they've taken so long. They say justice delayed is justice denied. In some cases, real cases that have real merit, because it takes so long for the court to hear them, they've lost their force. They've lost the impetus behind whatever the dispute was. So I do agree with him that we should pass a constitutional judgment that says that not every single case, like now, even if you have just a dispute between landlord and tenant, or a very minor commercial dispute between two people who did business together, you take it to the high court rules. The one party, the loser, is not satisfied, takes it to the appellate court, loses again, still not satisfied. He can go to the Supreme Court on maybe a very minor, insignificant matter that arbitration could resolve, or that is clear, that is very blatant, that this is what happened, and the lower courts have ruled correctly. But maybe the loser is trying to delay, maybe he's trying to see if he can get technicality. Those things waste the court's time, waste our resources. So I do agree with the Supreme Court Chief Justice on that.
All right. He also gave the judiciary a pass mark for the year, which CSO have come out to fault his claim, considering the verdict they've seen so far with the 2023 polls, and they're also saying that this would affect Nigeria's democracy. What's your thought on that?
Well, yes, in recent times, in the most recent past, there have been some questions about some of the judgments, but we don't hear a lot of the judgments that a lot of the cases that they hear and they adjudicate. We don't hear about them because they're usually either commercial disputes, criminal cases, things that don't concern us. It's election one that concerns the whole country, and that's why every ruling they make on the election, we hear about it. It's all in the news. But elections are just a small fraction of what they do, and so probably constitutes less than 1/3 or 1/4 of all the cases they hear. So if you take the sum total of everything they've heard in the last 1 year, they've actually done better than they've done worse, right? So, but because we didn't hear about those other cases, we don't know. That's why we're assuming that these bad ones they did for these ones we don't like that they did for the elections, that's the way they've done everything. No, it is not so. It is not so. There are some cases that they have done well, but we will hear about them. Also, on the electoral matters, the ones we're not satisfied with, generally, I think it's more of incompetence than out and out corruption. Because I think if a case on its merits, a case that is black and white, I think it's very difficult to take money from somebody and try to justify in a roundabout way something that is not true. Legal minds and intelligent people will read that judgment and they will see the holes. Because if you took money to say what is not the truth, and the truth is sitting somewhere, some people can see it. So I'm not sure that corruption is as pervasive as in the judiciary as we think it is. I think it's more a problem of incompetence, and because we have all kinds of people being appointed to the court, all kinds of political patronage, sons and daughters of political people are rewarded with magistracies, and then they elevate from there, from magistrate to high court, from high court to appellate court, but maybe they don't have the right tools from the beginning. And then also look at, for example, the issue of the case in CONUA where the certified true copy was saying something different from what the judge read out in court. That is incompetence, whether it was from the judges that read the thing or the registrar who eventually typed the CTC. It's incompetence. And those are some of the things that I think need to be addressed more in the court system.
All right, moving on now. The governor of Central Bank, Mr. Cardoso, has said that an efficient judicial system will attract a foreign direct investment. Now, the question is, well, what do you think, or what ways do you think that the judiciary can contribute to the effectiveness of a monetary policy?
Well, you see, because in commercial transactions, there will always be disputes when we are trading, especially we are exchanging services or goods for money. We are offering services. We are giving contracts. There will always be disputes, and where there's a dispute, there needs to be the confidence that there's a resolution mechanism that will be fair, that will be just, and that will be above board. If there is no assurance of that, foreign direct investment is not going to come, because it's going to be worried that if in the event of a dispute between it and its local partners, can it get justice? Is its money protected? Is its rights protected? Or will it be, because remember, foreign direct investment is coming from offshore. It's coming into foreign territory. That's why it's called foreign direct investment. So the investors have very little control. They're not from here. They don't live here, but they are entrusting their money. They are sending their money to faraway lands where they have little or no control. They have no control over the courts, no control over the political system, no control over the economy. Anything can happen at any time. So they need the confidence that if there's a dispute, or if there's a downturn in the economy, or if the terms and conditions of their agreement change. Okay, if there's a force majeure, suppose there's a natural disaster, maybe a tornado or an earthquake or a hurricane, or even militants damage pipelines, things unexpected happen. So when the unexpected happens, foreign money needs to be assured that it will go through a process that's transparent. Because remember, foreign direct investment, the idea is they want profit. They are investing their money so they can get profit. So they want assurance, not just that their principal is safe, but that their interest is also protected, that they will come out unscathed, that their money will make money, and they'll be able to repatriate it when they are done. The only way to assure that is to have an above board and efficient judiciary, because when disputes come or when the unexpected happens, generally we have to go through a legal process to make everybody whole again. So if there is no confidence in the judicial process, foreign money will not come. It won't come to any place where it doesn't have confidence that it can get justice in the event of something going wrong.
All right, so let's move on now. The federal government has increased the 2024 budget proposal from the initial 26 trillion to 27.5 trillion, and according to them, this is to meet the present economic realities. Now, the question is, Nigerians' budget has, keeps on increasing significantly each year. Do you think that this is a result of like budget padding?
Well, no. It could, it might be, it might not be. I don't really know. But, well, the reality is that, well, things are more expensive, of course, and then the population is growing, so there's more social services to deliver. So budgets will continue to increase. That's standard all over the world, because you have more things to do, you have more people to serve, and things are more expensive. It's not how much you built a road for in 2020 that you build that same road in 2024. Cost of laterite has gone up, cost of labor will go up, so costs escalate. The bigger issue for me in this whole budget thing is, where is the money coming from? Where is the 27.5 trillion coming from? They used, I think, $70-something per barrel of oil, and they used 750 as dollar to naira exchange. By the time they computed it all, the full amount of money that they're expected to generate, or they're expecting us to generate, is about 12-13 trillion. So there's a shortfall of 8-9 trillion to cover that budget. where is that money going to come from? We have a revenue problem. That's the issue. And as long as we're not diversifying the economy, we're not finding different ways. Well, I think with what President Tinubu is doing now, doing house cleaning at the CBN, house cleaning at FIRS, even EFCC, some other agencies, relating to leakages of money, the places where you said monetary policy, fiscal policy, where he's now restructuring all those agencies. I think the idea is to begin to see what we can do about our revenue problem. We have a revenue problem. That's the issue, because there's very little you can do about your expenditure when you have a burgeoning population that's growing all the time, when you have inflation, when you have escalating costs. There's little you can do on the expenses side, except, of course, which we've always advocated, reduce the size of governance, reduce the cost of governance, and those kind of things. But in lieu of that, the only other thing you can do is look at the revenue side and see how you can expand or increase revenue. And that, for me, is the bigger challenge of that budget. Yes, 27.5 trillion. In actual fact, I think it's actually relatively small for our economy when you consider the fact that the CBN governor said the other day that we'll have a $1 trillion economy by 2030. He said it the other day that the way the government is planning, in another 7 years, we'll have a $1 trillion economy by 2030. Well, I don't see how you can have a $1 trillion economy by 2030 and you only have 27.5 trillion naira budget. It doesn't compute. The numbers, the lacuna is just too wide between the two. It's not realistic. I think if you have a 1 trillion, if you have a projection of a 1 trillion naira budget, $1 trillion budget economy for 2030, by now we should be looking at 100, 200 trillion naira budgets at this time. So, but of course, that's not realistic because we don't have the money. Even this 27.5 that we're proposing, we don't have the money. So, I'm not so sure padding. Well, look, politics, the way it's played, each ministry is going to come, each MD is going to come and defend the budget is submitted. The legislators are going to pretend to scream, they're going to make a lot of noise. It's too much, it's too much. It's all a shakedown. At the end of the day, they've all put their own little, fluff and their own little constituency stuff inside each of them. So, yeah, there's going to be padding, there always will be. But what proportion of it? Okay, so they've increased it by 1.5 trillion. Who knows? Most of it may be padding, but that's a price that the executive has to pay to get his budget approved. That's par for the course.
All right, let's touch on this one before we go. Now, lecturers in public universities have said that the government should put on hold any plan to set up new universities because the existing ones are poorly funded and because they look malnourished. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think I have a tendency to agree with that. I think they should leave university education to the private sector. I think that this idea of doing student loans that government is proposing to start in January 2024, that if government gives support to students, they can afford to even go to private universities, because even all the government universities that are existing now, they are all groaning, they are all dilapidated, they don't have lecturers, their infrastructure is poor, learning environment is weak, the graduates they are churning out are substandard or ill-educated. So to add more is pandering to quantity over quality. Granted, I think JAM gave some numbers the other day that showed that they only were able to offer admission to maybe 20% of all those who wanted to get into university. What that says is that we don't have enough capacity in the tertiary education system. And so we need to increase capacity. But before we increase capacity, I think what we should do is shore up the existing ones, try and create financial opportunity for those, competition, of course, will always make those who are more brilliant accepted by the private institutions through scholarships, student